There is a detail buried in this story that reframes everything. King Charles was secretly paying for Princess Beatrice's apartment inside St James's Palace, and her husband Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi was using those royal rooms to entertain private business clients. A covert subsidy dressed up as family loyalty, quietly underpinning an entire financial operation. And now the king is under pressure to pull it. That one fact changes what you are looking at when you see photographs of Beatrice dancing on tables in St Tropez, or spending a day in bed at Le Club 55 after a heavy night, or skipping trooping the colour to attend a wedding in Austria. This is not a woman living carelessly. This is a woman who knows the floor beneath her is shifting. The parties, the absences, the separate evenings Edo spent mingling with Amanda Holden and Kelly Brook, none of it is random. It is all connected to a single fragile arrangement that is now coming apart. To understand how they got here, you need to understand exactly what was at stake. Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi built his reputation on charm and discretion. The property developer, founder of Banda, the boutique design and development firm he launched in 2007, had cultivated a particular kind of clientele, wealthy, private, the sort of people who buy homes in Notting Hill and Verbier and do not discuss the price. He married Princess Beatrice in July 2020, a ceremony so stripped back by COVID restrictions that it took place in the grounds of Windsor Castle with fewer than 20 guests. No fanfare, no crowds, and yet within the industry he operated in, the marriage changed everything. The royal connection was not incidental to Banda's growth, it was the architecture of it. Beatrice herself had spent years trying to carve out a role that felt genuinely useful. After leaving Buckingham Palace's official payroll, she had never been a working royal in the formal sense. She moved through a series of corporate positions, eventually landing at Affinity, an artificial intelligence software company, where she held the title of Vice President of Partnerships and Strategy. The job was real, the title was serious, but the questions about what exactly a princess brought to a technology firm were never entirely put to rest. They married and settled into a life split between London and the European social circuit. A daughter, Sienna Elizabeth, arrived in September 2021. Beatrice appeared to find in motherhood something steadying, something that the public role had never quite provided. And Edo, for his part, had Luce, his son from his previous relationship with Dara Huang, already part of the family fabric. From the outside, it looked like equilibrium. A modern royal couple navigating a complicated world with reasonable grace. The apartment at St James's Palace sat at the centre of that equilibrium. Clarence House had made it available as a family residence, and the arrangement carried with it a weight of institutional blessing that money alone cannot purchase. For Edo's business, proximity to that kind of legitimacy was worth more than any advertising budget. But King Charles's patience with arrangements inherited from a previous reign is not unlimited, and somewhere in the last 12 months, the calculation at the top of the family quietly changed. The eviction notice, when it effectively came, did not arrive with fanfare. There was no dramatic confrontation in a palace corridor, no audience with the king. That is not how these things are done. Instead, the signal was institutional and unmistakable. A quiet withdrawal of the arrangement that had underpinned the Mapellis London life, communicated through the kind of polite language that the royal household uses when it has already made up its mind. Edo and Beatrice were informed that the St James's Palace apartment would no longer be available to them as a family residence. The timing, landing in the spring of 2025, was not accidental. Charles had spent the better part of a year reorganizing the working structure of the monarchy around a smaller, more functional core. Apartments in royal palaces, subsidized by an institution already under public scrutiny over its finances, were increasingly difficult to justify for members who carried no official working brief. And Edo, whatever his personal warmth with the family, carried no such brief. He was a businessman, a private citizen with a royal wife, in the cold accounting. For the modern monarchy, that combination no longer entitled him to what Clarence House had previously extended. The practical consequence was jarring. St James's Palace is not merely a prestigious address. It sits inside a functioning royal complex, staffed and secured at public expense. Losing it meant finding a property on the open London market, at a moment when Edo's business interests were generating rather less income than his lifestyle had historically required. Mapelli Mozzi's property development and design firm, Banda, had been navigating a difficult period. The luxury end of the London property market had contracted sharply post-pandemic, and several projects that were meant to deliver significant returns had moved more slowly than projected. The financial picture was not catastrophic, but it was uncomfortable in ways that made the loss of a subsidized palace apartment feel considerably worse than inconvenient. Sources close to the couple described Beatrice as genuinely distressed, not performing distress, actually struggling. She had built a routine around that apartment, around the proximity to her mother Sarah Ferguson at Royal Lodge, around the sense that the family geography was finally, after years of upheaval, settled. Sienna, born in September 2021, had known no other London home. This was not an abstraction. This was the dismantling of a life that had taken considerable effort to construct. What made it harder was the specific reason. Edo had, in the months before the decision landed, made a sequence of moves that sources within the family privately described as overstepping. In the summer of 2024, footage emerged from a gathering in St Tropez, a lavish private event attended by a circle of wealthy European socialites, that showed Edo in a condition and context that sat uneasily alongside the careful image Beatrice had worked to project. He was not photographed doing anything criminal, but the images circulated in royal and press circles with the specific energy of material that someone somewhere had decided deserved to be seen. Royal aides noted it. The King's office noted it. Then came the business alignment that truly shifted things. Edo had been cultivating a set of commercial partnerships that leaned, perhaps too deliberately, into his proximity to the crown. One venture in particular, a luxury property project in the Gulf region, was being marketed in ways that sources said made implicit reference to his royal connections, not explicit enough to constitute a formal breach of protocol, but enough that it reached the attention of people whose job it is to protect the royal brand from exactly this kind of ambient exploitation. A quiet conversation was had. Edo, by all accounts, received the message, but the damage to the confidence that Clarence House had placed in him was already done. This is where the picture becomes genuinely complicated, because Beatrice, in the assessment of people who know her well, was not complicit in any of this. She had, if anything, been privately urging caution. She understood the rules in a way that Edo, for all his intelligence and charm, had perhaps never fully internalized. He had married into a family that operates on an entirely different set of pressures than the private sector. Exposure that might generate useful profile for a property developer in any other context is precisely the kind of exposure that corrodes royal credibility. Beatrice knew this. She had watched her parents spend decades demonstrating exactly what happens when the lines are not held. So when the consequences arrived, they arrived in a way that was deeply unfair to her specifically. She had not sought the attention. She had not signed off on the branding decisions. She had been trying quietly and consistently to be exactly what her role required. A princess who does her charitable work, raises her daughter, supports her husband, and stays out of the headlines. And now she was facing the loss of her home because her husband had miscalculated. That asymmetry is what makes this story something other than a simple tale of royal entitlement meeting institutional consequence. Beatrice is not the villain here, and she is not the architect of the situation she now finds herself in. But there is one more dimension that has received almost no attention in the coverage that has trickled out. A detail that reframes the question of why this decision was made now, at this particular moment, rather than 6 months earlier or a year from now. It has nothing to do with Edo's business interests, and it has everything to do with the future of the House of York itself. The timing is not accidental. It never is with the palace. When the crown estate and royal household machinery moves against a member of the family, it rarely does so in isolation. There is almost always a secondary calculation running beneath the surface, a longer game being played, and in this case, that longer game is about what the House of York actually becomes after Andrew is finally, fully removed from the picture. Think about what the York family looks like right now. Andrew is a disgraced figure living on borrowed time at Royal Lodge, fighting an eviction he will almost certainly lose. Sarah Ferguson, whatever her charms, carries decades of tabloid baggage and no formal royal standing. Eugenie lives primarily in Portugal. That leaves Beatrice, quietly by default, as the most functional, most publicly credible member of what was once a proud secondary branch of the Windsor family. She is the one who could, in theory, rehabilitate the York name over time. She is the asset, which is precisely why what happens to Beatrice's household matters institutionally, not just personally. If the palace allows the York family's most stable representative to be dragged into financial embarrassment through her husband's failed ventures, the damage is not contained to Beatrice and Edo, it bleeds upward. It becomes another chapter in the ongoing story of a royal branch in free fall. And Charles, who's been deliberate and unsentimental about slimming down the working monarchy, does not need that story running in parallel with everything else he is managing. So the pressure on Frogmore Cottage is not purely punitive, it is also clarifying. It forces a choice. Edoardo either gets his affairs in order, or he becomes a permanent liability to the only York who still has genuine institutional value. The palace does not need to say that explicitly. The message is embedded in the action itself. Now, whether Beatrice and Edoardo actually weather this depends on something the palace cannot fully control: their marriage. There is no credible public evidence that the relationship has broken down. Beatrice has given no indication she intends to distance herself from her husband, but the pressure being applied here is real, and it is targeted. Financial instability, the loss of a royal residence, public scrutiny of Edo's business conduct, these are not small stressor. They are the kind of sustained pressure that either forges something stronger or gradually dismantles it. What seems most likely, looking at the shape of this, is a period of enforced recalibration. Edoardo steps back from the more visible failures, reorients his professional life towards something quieter and less exposed, and Beatrice continues doing what she has always done, showing up, saying little, doing the work. The palace gets a manageable York. The Mozzis get to keep their standing. Nobody wins decisively, but the crisis is contained. That is the best case version of what comes next, but it rests on Edoardo accepting a diminished public role, and on Beatrice being willing to absorb the cost of defending him through what has already been a bruising public episode. Whether that agreement, spoken or unspoken, is actually in place is the question that remains unanswered. What is certain is this: the House of York has never been a story of clean endings. It has always been a story of people navigating an institution that demands dignity, while quietly tolerating chaos, so long as the chaos stays manageable. Andrew survived for decades on that arrangement. Sarah Ferguson rebuilt herself inside it. And now Beatrice and Edoardo are discovering, rather later than they should have, exactly where its limits are. Beatrice has earned something close to genuine public sympathy, not because she is a senior royal, not because of her title, but because she has conducted herself with a consistency that the York family has rarely managed. She did not ask for the St Tropez photographs. She did not ask to have her husband's business failures dissected in the press, and she did not ask to be born into a family whose reputation was already structurally compromised before she was old enough to do anything about it. But sympathy only carries a person so far. Eventually, the choices made beside you become inseparable from your own story. That is the quiet, uncomfortable truth sitting at the center of all of this. Edoardo's record is now part of Beatrice's record. The question of whether she protects him or distances herself, whether the palace absorbs them or quietly sidelines them, will define the York chapter that comes after Andrew's long shadow finally fades. The House of York is not finished, but it is at a genuinely consequential crossroads, and the next few years will settle a great deal. If you want to keep following stories like this one, the real dynamics behind the headlines, the ones the official statements never quite capture, subscribing to this channel is the best way to make sure you don't miss them. Next, we're looking at a royal relationship that the press has largely left alone, and probably shouldn't have. That one is coming very soon.